It was one of those evenings that seemed to shimmer with elegance. The hall was filled with soft golden light, and the sound of clinking glasses and low conversations floated through the air. People from all walks of high society had gathered for a charity gala in Vienna, a night where music and generosity met under one roof. The walls were lined with portraits of great composers, and in the center of the room stood a magnificent black grand piano that seemed to promise something extraordinary. The star of the evening was a world-renowned pianist named Leonard Werner. His name carried weight in the classical music world, known for his perfection, his technique, and his pride. Leonard had been performing on the world's biggest stages since he was a teenager, and tonight was no different. The guests whispered his name with admiration as he moved across the room, confident, charming, and dressed in a tailored suit that reflected his status. People admired him, but they also feared him a little. Leonard was known not only for his brilliance but for his sharp tongue. He had a way of making others feel small, especially those who didn't belong to his circle of fame and refinement. For him, the piano wasn't just an instrument. It was a throne, and on that throne no one dared challenge him. Among the glittering crowd sat a woman who didn't quite fit in. Her name was Elena Morris. She wasn't dressed in designer clothes or covered in jewelry. Her simple navy blue dress looked modest beside the gowns and tuxedos around her. She sat quietly near the back, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes resting gently on the piano. There was something calm about her, almost invisible yet not entirely unnoticed. Elena wasn't a socialite or a patron of the arts. She had been invited by the event's organizer, who knew her through a small local music foundation. She worked as a piano teacher for children in her town. Nothing glamorous, just lessons in a small community center. To her, music wasn't about fame or applause. It was about feeling, about letting the heart speak when words weren't enough. As the evening went on, Leonard took the stage with his usual confidence. The lights dimmed slightly and the audience grew quiet. He began to play, his fingers dancing across the keys with precision. Each note sparkled like crystal. The audience was mesmerized. They clapped thunderously when he finished, and Leonard stood soaking in their praise. He bowed deeply, his smile proud and satisfied. After his final piece, Leonard remained near the piano, enjoying the attention. People gathered around him asking questions, complimenting his skill. He loved it, the admiration, the compliments, the validation. Then someone mentioned that there was another piano lover in the audience, the woman sitting quietly at the back. Leonard looked toward where Elena sat. His brow lifted slightly. "Ah, a fellow musician?" he asked with a half-smile. The organizer nodded and explained that Elena was a teacher, someone who had dedicated her life to helping children learn music. Leonard chuckled softly, the kind of laugh that wasn't cruel on the surface but carried a hint of condescension. "How lovely," he said. "A teacher. That's sweet." The people around him laughed politely. Elena looked down at her hands, pretending not to notice, but a faint flush crossed her cheeks. Then, with that mix of pride and mischief that often follows arrogance, Leonard turned to the crowd and said, "Shall we have a little fun tonight? Perhaps our dear teacher can show us a tune." His tone was light, playful to some, but everyone knew it was meant as a tease. The audience giggled, some clapping at the idea. A few even turned to look at Elena, waiting for her reaction. Elena smiled softly, unsure what to say. Her heart fluttered in her chest. She didn't want to embarrass anyone, least of all herself. "Oh, I couldn't," she said politely, waving her hand slightly. "This is your evening," but Leonard pressed on. "Nonsense," he said. "Music belongs to everyone, doesn't it? Come, let's hear a little something." "I'm sure we'd all love to." His grin widened and the crowd murmured in agreement. Someone even started clapping, encouraging her to step up. Elena hesitated. She hadn't played on a grand stage in years. Her days of performing had faded quietly into the past, replaced by simple lessons, small recitals, and everyday life. But something inside her stirred, a quiet voice that said, "Why not?" After all, she had nothing to prove and yet everything to express. With a slow breath, she rose from her chair. The crowd parted slightly as she walked toward the piano. Her steps were measured, calm, but her heart was racing. Leonard stepped aside, gesturing toward the seat like a king offering his throne. "The stage is yours," he said smoothly. Elena gave him a small nod. Her eyes weren't defiant, just peaceful. She sat down on the bench and looked at the keys. letting her fingers hover above them for a moment. The piano felt familiar, like an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years. The room had gone quiet again, filled with curiosity and a touch of anticipation. Some guests whispered to each other, wondering what this simple woman could possibly play after a master like Leonard. Leonard crossed his arms and watched, a faint smirk still on his lips. To him, this was a harmless bit of entertainment, a brief, amusing moment before the evening continued. He had no idea that what was about to happen would change the tone of the entire night. Elena closed her eyes for a brief second. Memories of her younger days flashed before her. Long hours of practice, her mother's proud smile, the endless nights when music had been her only companion. She took one deep breath and pressed her fingers gently against the keys. A soft chord filled the air, delicate yet full. The sound was pure and honest, not grand, not showy, but alive. The crowd grew still. The first few notes carried something that no one had expected: emotion. True, unfiltered emotion, the kind that speaks directly to the heart without needing words. Leonard's smirk began to fade slightly, replaced by a flicker of curiosity. There was something in the way she played, her touch, her control, her quiet strength. It wasn't technical brilliance. It was soul Elena didn't rush. Every note seemed to breathe. Every pause had meaning. Her hands moved gracefully, telling a story that only she understood. The audience forgot to whisper, forgot to move. All they could do was listen, and in that moment, something shifted in the air. The laughter, the teasing, the pride, all of it melted into silence. Leonard found himself watching her more closely now, the corners of his mouth no longer curled in amusement. There was a depth in her playing that he hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if the piano itself had been waiting for her touch. When she finally lifted her hands off the keys, the last note hung in the air, trembling softly before fading into quiet. No one clapped immediately. They were too stunned, too moved to break the spell. Then, slowly, the applause began, soft at first, then louder, growing into a wave of genuine admiration. Elena stood up quietly, gave a small, humble bow, and smiled. Her eyes glistened, but she said nothing. She didn't need to. As she returned to her seat, Leonard stood frozen by the piano. He couldn't find words. For the first time in years, he felt something rare: humility. And though no one realized it yet, that brief, unplanned performance would become the most unforgettable part of the evening. The applause that followed Elena's short performance still echoed softly in the hall. People were clapping with genuine feeling, not out of politeness but from something deeper, a connection that her music had awakened. Some smiled warmly, some blinked away quiet tears, and others simply stared, still lost in the spell she had cast. Leonard, the star of the night, stood beside the piano with his hand resting on the lid. For a long moment he said nothing. His proud smile was gone, replaced by something harder to describe. Surprise, maybe even confusion. He had invited her to play as a joke, but the music she had brought forth had touched something in him that he didn't expect. It was as if she had reminded everyone, including him, what real music meant. Elena returned to her seat slowly, nodding politely to the few people who congratulated her along the way. She didn't seem proud or eager for attention. Her expression was calm, almost peaceful, as if she had done nothing special. But in truth, she had changed the atmosphere of the entire evening. Leonard finally broke the silence. "Well," he said with a faint laugh that sounded forced, "I wasn't expecting that." His voice tried to carry a playful tone, but there was an edge beneath it. The guests chuckled politely, sensing the tension but pretending not to notice. Leonard turned to Elena and added, "That was impressive. You must practice quite a bit with your students." Elena smiled gently. "I try to keep up," she replied softly. "Music is part of who I am." Her words were simple, but something about the way she said them felt meaningful. Leonard nodded, still unsure how to respond. He turned back to the piano, clearing his throat. "Well, perhaps we should continue the evening," he said, trying to regain control of the moment. The host of the gala stepped forward, praising both performances, and encouraged everyone to enjoy the dinner that was being served. As people moved toward the tables, small conversations began buzzing all over the room, but most of them centered around one thing: the woman who had just played. Who is she? One guest whispered. "I've never heard of her before." "She said she's a teacher," another replied. "But that couldn't have been beginner-level playing. That was something else entirely." "I thought she was just being polite when she said she played," someone added. But that was pure emotion. Even Leonard looked shaken. Elena, meanwhile, sat quietly at her table near the back. A few people came over to compliment her, and she thanked each one modestly. She didn't seem to crave their praise. She smiled, nodded, and returned to her meal. There was a quiet dignity about her that drew respect without her asking for it. Leonard, on the other hand, found himself distracted. Throughout dinner, he kept glancing in her direction, replaying her performance in his mind. It had been so effortless, so natural, nothing like the rigid perfection he demanded from himself. There was something in her music that he couldn't quite explain. It was emotional, but not dramatic. Every note had felt alive, like it carried a piece of her soul. He tried to brush it off, but it bothered him. He had spent years perfecting his art, studying with the best, mastering every technical detail. Yet somehow this quiet woman had made the room come alive in a way he hadn't in years. He didn't want to admit it, but deep down he felt envy. As the evening went on, Leonard noticed that several guests had begun talking to Elena. One older couple invited her to their table, eager to learn more about her background. A young pianist asked her for advice. Even some reporters who had come to cover the event took notes about her unexpected performance. Leonard's pride began to sting. He had been the center of attention when the night began, and now all eyes seemed to have shifted toward her. He forced a smile whenever someone mentioned her name, but inside he was restless. Eventually, as dessert was served, the host of the event came to Leonard's table and leaned close. "Leonard," he said cheerfully, "that was quite a surprise earlier, wasn't it? Your guest really brought something special tonight." Leonard nodded slowly. "Yes, she did," he said. "Quite unexpected," the host chuckled. "You know, I was thinking, maybe we could have a little encore performance to close the night. Something light. Perhaps the two of you could share the piano? It would be delightful for the guests." Leonard froze. The idea of sharing the piano, with her, in front of everyone made his stomach tighten. "I'm not sure that's necessary," he said quickly. "The program is already complete," but the host was already excited. "Come now, it'll be wonderful. Just a short duet. People will love it." Before Leonard could protest again, the host had already walked off toward the stage to make the announcement. A moment later, his voice echoed through the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we conclude this beautiful evening, we have a special treat. Our talented pianist Leonard Werner and the lovely Elena will share the stage for one final piece together." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Leonard's jaw tightened, but he had no way out now. He looked toward Elena, who seemed just as surprised as he was. Their eyes met briefly, and she smiled kindly as if to say, "Let's just enjoy this." Leonard sighed quietly, straightened his jacket, and walked to the piano. Elena joined him a moment later. The audience watched eagerly, sensing a mix of excitement and curiosity. As they sat side by side at the bench, Leonard spoke softly without looking at her. "You can take the lead if you like," he said, his tone polite but distant. Elena shook her head slightly. "No, please," she replied gently. "You start. I'll follow." Leonard nodded. He placed his fingers on the keys and began to play, a light classical piece, cheerful and simple. His technique was flawless as always, every note perfectly measured. Elena waited a few bars, then joined in, weaving her part around his. Her style was softer, more fluid, almost like she was listening to him and replying through the music. Something strange happened as they played. Leonard found himself relaxing, letting go of his tight control. Her energy seemed to calm him, to bring warmth into the music. For the first time that night, his playing felt less like a performance and more like a conversation. The two of them created something beautiful, a balance between precision and emotion. When they finished, the audience stood to their feet in applause. The moment was magical, not because of perfection, but because of harmony. Leonard looked at Elena, genuinely smiling this time. "You're remarkable," he said quietly. She smiled back. "So are you," she replied. "But sometimes music speaks best when we stop trying to control it." Her words lingered with him. As the guests began to leave, Leonard stayed by the piano, lost in thought. The sound of her playing still echoed in his ears. He didn't understand why it had affected him so deeply. Perhaps it was because she reminded him of something he had lost, the pure love of music, the kind that wasn't about fame or skill, but about heart. Later that night, as the hall emptied, Leonard walked over to where Elena was gathering her things. "May I ask," he said carefully, "where did you learn to play like that?" Elena looked at him for a moment before answering. "I studied when I was younger," she said softly, "but life took me in other directions. I haven't performed in many years. Why not?" he asked, genuinely curious. She smiled faintly. "Sometimes life gives you choices that aren't easy. My mother fell ill. I cared for her, and when she passed, I didn't feel ready to return. Music stayed with me, though, quietly." Leonard nodded slowly, realizing there was more behind her calm presence than he'd imagined. "You gave up your career for family," he said quietly. "That's admirable." Elena shook her head. "It wasn't a sacrifice. It was love. Music and love are not separate things. They come from the same place." Her words touched him more than he expected. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hall was nearly empty now. Just a few staff cleaning up. As Elena prepared to leave, Leonard said softly, "You've reminded me of something tonight. Something I forgot a long time ago." She looked at him kindly. "Then I'm glad I played," she said. "Good night, Leonard." He watched her walk away, her figure disappearing through the grand doorway. The sound of her music still lingered in the air, gentle and unforgettable. That night, Leonard couldn't sleep. He sat by the piano in his hotel room, replaying the notes in his mind. For the first time in years, he felt small, not in a bad way, but in a human way. He realized how much he had lost behind all his pride, his fame, his pursuit of perfection. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this was not the end of their story. Something had shifted within him, something that would soon lead him to seek her out again, not as a rival, not as a joke, but as a student of humility and truth. Because sometimes, the most beautiful lessons in life come not from the masters of art, but from those who carry it quietly in their hearts. The next morning, the city woke quietly, but Leonard Werner did not. He had barely slept. His mind was restless, replaying every note that Elena had played the night before. It wasn't just her skill that haunted him. It was the honesty behind her music. There had been no showmanship, no effort to impress, only sincerity. That kind of purity was rare, and Leonard, for all his fame, realized he hadn't felt that connection to music in years. He sat by the window of his hotel room, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold beside him. Down below, the streets of Vienna moved at their usual pace. Trams gliding past, people heading to work, the faint sound of street musicians drifting from the square. For a moment, Leonard thought about going down there himself just to listen. Maybe, he thought, he would find something he'd been missing. But his thoughts always circled back to Elena. Who was she, really? A simple piano teacher, yes, that was what she'd said. But her playing had carried the grace of someone who had lived and breathed the instrument her entire life. The phrasing, the tone, the emotion, none of that could come from a hobbyist. There was something she hadn't said, something hidden beneath her calm smile. By noon, curiosity got the better of him. Leonard decided to visit the small music foundation that had invited her to the event. It wasn't far, a modest building tucked between two old bookstores on a quiet street. Inside, the place smelled of old paper, varnished wood, and faint traces of coffee. Photos of young students and old concerts lined the walls. The receptionist, a kind older woman with silver hair, recognized Leonard instantly. "Maestro Werner," she said, her eyes lighting up. "What a surprise to see you here." Leonard smiled politely. "Good afternoon. I hope I'm not intruding. I was at the gala last night and I met one of your teachers, Elena." The woman's face softened. "Ah, yes. She's one of the kindest souls we have here. Did you enjoy her playing?" Leonard hesitated, then nodded. Enjoy isn't quite the word. It moved me. She played with a depth I can't explain. The receptionist chuckled softly. "I'm not surprised. She has that effect on people. Would you like to know something, Maestro? Most of the children who come here don't know her story. She doesn't talk about it. But years ago, she was one of the most gifted pianists in Europe." Leonard blinked. "She was?" The woman nodded slowly. "Yes. Long before she started teaching here, she used to perform under her maiden name, Elena Novak. Maybe you've heard it?" Leonard froze. The name hit him like a note struck too hard. He had heard it. Years ago, when he was still a student himself, he remembered reading about a young prodigy who had been praised by critics for her sensitivity and emotion. Her performances of Chopin had been described as breathing poetry. Then suddenly she had vanished. No one knew why. She disappeared, Leonard murmured. Everyone thought she stopped because of an injury. The woman shook her head. No, her mother became ill. She left everything to take care of her. When her mother passed, Elena never returned to the stage. She said she didn't want to chase fame anymore. She wanted to teach, to help others find joy in music, not pressure. Leonard was quiet for a long moment. The weight of the revelation settled heavily in his chest. The woman he had mocked in front of everyone, the one he thought was just a small-town teacher, had once been a musician far greater than most who filled concert halls today. Does she still perform? He asked softly. Only when she feels the music asks her to, the woman said. She plays for our students sometimes or at small community gatherings. She never advertises it. She believes music should live quietly, like the sound of rain, meant for those who truly listen. Leonard left the foundation feeling humbled and strangely emotional. The sun had shifted higher in the sky, warming the cobblestone streets, but he barely noticed. Every step he took was filled with thought. All those years he had believed success came from perfection, from applause, from being seen. And yet this woman had walked away from all of it and still carried a light within her that he no longer did. That afternoon, he found himself sitting at a small cafe not far from the foundation. He ordered coffee but didn't drink it. Instead, he watched the people around him, artists sketching, students reading, an old man feeding pigeons. Life seemed softer outside the spotlight. He realized how long it had been since he had simply watched the world without rushing through it. After a while, he made up his mind. He wanted to see Elena again, not out of pride but out of respect. He wanted to thank her and maybe to learn something from her that no academy or award had ever taught him. He asked around and found out that she taught children every afternoon at a small community center on the edge of the city. The next day he went there quietly without calling ahead. The building was old but bright. Walls covered in children's drawings, a few small upright pianos lined against the wall. He stood at the door listening. Inside, Elena was teaching a group of 5 children. Their laughter mixed with the uneven sounds of piano keys. She was patient and warm, encouraging each of them even when they stumbled. Don't rush, she said gently. Let the music breathe. Every note has a little story inside it. Leonard smiled to himself. There was something beautiful about seeing a woman of such talent, finding joy in simplicity. She didn't need a concert hall. She only needed a piano and people willing to learn. When the lesson ended, the children gathered their books and waved goodbye. Only then did Elena notice Leonard standing near the door. Leonard, she said in surprise, her eyes softening. You found me? I did, he said with a faint smile. I hope you don't mind. Of course not, she replied, wiping her hands on a cloth. Come in. He stepped inside, looking around the modest room. You teach here every day? Most days, she said. It's quiet here. The children come after school. Some can't afford lessons, so we keep it free. He nodded. It's wonderful what you're doing. Elena smiled. It's simple work, but it feels right. There was a pause, a silence filled only by the faint ticking of a wall clock. Then Leonard said softly, I visited the foundation today. They told me who you really are. Elena looked down for a moment, then gave a small smile. I thought you might find out. Why didn't you tell anyone? He asked. Why hide it? She looked at him with calm eyes. Because I don't need people to know. Fame can be beautiful, but it can also make you forget why you started. I don't want that again. Music belongs to the heart, not to applause. Leonard felt a lump in his throat. You could still perform, you know. You could fill concert halls again. She shook her head gently. Maybe. But I think my time for that has passed. There are others now. Young musicians who dream the way I once did. I'd rather help them find their path than chase mine again. Her humility struck him deeply. You make it sound so easy, he said quietly. Letting go. It isn't easy, she admitted. It took me years to stop missing it. But when I finally accepted that music isn't about being seen, it's about being felt, I found peace. Leonard stood silently for a moment, staring at the piano. When I was young, I used to play because I loved it. Then it became my job, my identity, my pride. Somewhere along the way, I stopped listening. Elena nodded. It happens to many of us. The world asks for perfection, but the soul asks for truth. Her words lingered like the gentle sound of a fading chord. After a while, she gestured toward the piano. Would you like to play? Leonard hesitated. Here? Why not? She said with a smile. Music doesn't belong only to the big halls. He walked to the piano and sat down. It wasn't a concert grand, just an old upright, slightly out of tune. Still, when he placed his hands on the keys, something inside him loosened. He began to play a soft melody, hesitant at first, then clearer as he let go of trying to be perfect. Elena listened quietly, her eyes half closed. When he stopped, she said gently, That was honest. You played like a person, not a performer. Leonard looked at her, then smiled faintly, maybe for the first time in years. They talked for a long while after that, about music, about life, about the difference between success and peace. By the time he left the community center, the sun was setting, painting the sky with gold and rose. As he walked back toward the city, Leonard felt lighter than he had in years. He realized that Elena hadn't just reminded him of music's beauty, she had reminded him of his own humanity. And though he didn't know it yet, this meeting would soon change the way he played forever, because some lessons are not taught on a stage, but in quiet rooms, between two people who understand what it truly means to listen. A few weeks passed after Leonard's visit to the community center, but her music stayed with him like a quiet echo. Every time he sat at his piano, he heard her sound in his mind, not the notes, but the feeling. It had changed something deep inside him. His concerts still drew crowds, his name still filled posters, but he no longer felt the same thrill. The applause sounded different now, distant, like a wave that came and went without truly touching him. One evening, after performing in Paris, Leonard sat alone backstage. The hall was empty, the lights dimmed, and the air smelled faintly of polish and flowers from the bouquets left on his dressing table. He looked at his reflection in the mirror, the polished suit, the practiced smile, the face that audiences loved. Yet behind the reflection, he saw something missing. He thought of Elena's calm face, her gentle smile, her quiet conviction that music wasn't about fame. He remembered her words. Music doesn't belong to applause. It belongs to the heart. For the first time in years, he realized he didn't want to just perform. He wanted to feel again. The next morning, Leonard made a decision. He would reach out to Elena, not as a maestro inviting another musician, but as a person seeking truth through music. He wrote her a short letter. I've been thinking about what you said. You reminded me of something real, something I had forgotten. I want to share that feeling again, not in a grand concert hall, but somewhere honest. Would you consider playing together again? Not for fame, but for meaning? He sent it through the Music Foundation, unsure if she would reply. Days passed, and he began to wonder if she had chosen to stay in her quiet world. But one afternoon, as he was practicing, a letter arrived. It was written in neat, careful handwriting. Leonard, I am touched by your words. I believe music only speaks truth when it's shared from the heart. If you wish to play, I will join you. But let's do it for those who need it most, not for those who already have everything. Elena. He read the letter twice, smiling softly. Her answer wasn't just yes, it was a direction. Within a week, Leonard contacted the foundation again. He offered to hold a small charity concert, not for critics or celebrities, but for children, teachers, and families who loved music. He didn't want expensive tickets or formal gowns. He wanted honesty, the kind of evening that would bring people together through sound, not status. When the announcement went out, many were surprised. A famous pianist like Leonard performing without charge in a small community hall? It sounded almost unbelievable. But Leonard didn't care about the gossip. For once, he was doing something that felt right. The evening of the concert arrived quietly. The hall was modest. Wooden floors, folding chairs, a single grand piano at the front. There were no chandeliers or photographers, no red carpets or security guards. Families came in holding hands. Children whispered excitedly. Even a few local musicians gathered in the back, curious to see what this performance would bring. When Elena entered, dressed simply as always, the room seemed to soften. She smiled kindly at the guests, helping a little girl find her seat before walking toward the stage. Leonard was already there, adjusting the piano bench. When their eyes met, he felt that same calm energy she always carried, gentle but strong. "You look nervous," she said quietly, smiling. He chuckled softly. "I haven't been nervous in years," he admitted, "but tonight I am." "Good," she said. "It means you care." The host of the event, a young woman from the foundation, stepped up to the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," she began warmly. "Tonight is not about fame or titles. It's about the gift of music and the people who keep its spirit alive. Please welcome two friends who have come together to remind us what true art sounds like." The audience clapped as Leonard and Elena took their seats at the piano. For a moment, there was complete stillness. Leonard looked at the keys, then at her. "Shall we?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Let's listen first and then play." They began with a simple duet. The melody was gentle, flowing like a quiet river. Their hands moved together in perfect understanding, each one giving space to the other. It wasn't a battle or a performance. It was a conversation. Two souls speaking in the same language. As the piece continued, the audience grew silent, fully absorbed. Some closed their eyes. Others leaned forward, afraid to miss a note. Children sat still, their faces glowing with wonder. It was the kind of music that didn't just sound beautiful. It felt alive. When they finished, there was no instant applause. Only a deep silence followed by the soft sound of someone quietly crying in the back. Then the clapping came, not loud but sincere. It wasn't admiration they were showing. It was gratitude. Leonard stood and looked out at the crowd. "Music has given me everything," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "But for a long time I forgot why I started. I thought perfection mattered more than truth. Tonight I want to thank someone who reminded me that music is not about being perfect. It's about being real." He turned toward Elena, who looked down, a faint blush on her cheeks. The audience followed his gaze and began to applaud her. She smiled modestly, her eyes shining with humility. They continued playing through the evening, small duets, solo pieces, even a few short tunes for the children in the front rows. Between pieces, Elena spoke softly about her students, about how music can comfort and heal. She told the audience that she once walked away from the stage not out of loss but to find peace. Her words touched everyone. There was something magnetic about her calm honesty. She didn't try to teach or impress. She simply shared. By the end of the night, even Leonard's eyes glistened. He hadn't felt such warmth from a crowd in years. It wasn't thunderous applause or endless praise. It was something deeper. It was connection. After the concert ended, people came forward to thank them. Some hugged Elena. Others shook Leonard's hand. A few parents told her that their children had been inspired to start learning piano. Elena smiled gently, saying, "That's the best gift we could hope for." When the hall finally emptied and the lights dimmed, only the two of them remained on stage. Leonard sat on the piano bench, running his fingers lightly over the keys. "You were right," he said quietly. "It isn't about being seen. It's about being felt." Elena smiled, leaning against the piano. "And you felt it tonight, didn't you?" He nodded slowly. "For the first time in a long time. You've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever." She looked at him for a moment, her expression soft but thoughtful. "Then keep it safe," she said. "And when you play next time, don't play for them. Play for yourself and for the truth inside the music." He smiled faintly. "Will you play again, not just here but publicly? People deserve to hear you." She shook her head. "Maybe one day. But it doesn't matter if the crowd knows me. The music already does." Leonard didn't push further. He knew she meant it, and somehow that made him admire her even more. Later that night, as they walked out of the hall, the city was quiet. The moon hung low over the rooftops, and the air was cool. They walked side by side for a while, not speaking. Then Leonard said softly, "Do you ever miss it? The big stage, the lights?" She smiled faintly. "Sometimes. But then I remember that even the smallest room can hold a whole world of music. You don't need a grand stage to reach hearts." He nodded, feeling the truth in her words. "You've changed how I see everything," he said. Elena looked at him gently. "No, Leonard. You changed yourself. You just needed a reminder." When they reached the corner where their paths would part, Leonard hesitated. "I'll be leaving for another tour soon," he said. "But when I play again, I want you to know "I'll carry your lesson with me." She smiled. "That's all the thanks I need." They said goodnight and she walked away down the quiet street, her figure fading under the streetlights. Leonard stood there for a long time, watching until she disappeared. When he finally turned toward his hotel, his steps felt lighter. He didn't feel like the same man who had mocked her weeks ago. That man had been proud, untouchable, empty. But now, something had shifted inside him. Something humble, something human. That night, when he sat at the piano in his room, he didn't play a concert piece or a complex sonata. He played something simple, something that came from within. It was rough around the edges, imperfect but real. And for the first time in years, he smiled as he played. He realized that music had not left him. He had simply forgotten to listen. And now, thanks to her, he heard it again, the quiet voice of truth behind every note. Months passed since that small concert in the community hall, but the memory of that night stayed alive, not only in Leonard's heart but in the hearts of everyone who attended. The story of a world-renowned pianist performing alongside a humble woman had quietly spread, carried by word of mouth, social media, and even a few music journalists who happened to be there. It wasn't a big headline, but it resonated deeply. People were drawn not by fame, but by the sincerity of it. The idea that music could still belong to ordinary hearts. Leonard had gone back to touring again, but something inside him had changed completely. His performances were no longer about speed or technique. There was emotion now, softness where there had once been pride, warmth where there had been distance. His audience noticed it. Critics called it a rebirth of soul. But Leonard knew what it really was. It was Elena's quiet influence still guiding him. During one of his performances in Vienna, after finishing a hauntingly beautiful piece, he paused before the next song. The grand hall waited in silence, expecting another flawless act, but Leonard spoke instead. "There's someone who reminded me what music truly is," he said softly. "She doesn't stand under bright lights or wear fine clothes. She teaches children in a small town, but her heart holds more music than I've ever known. Tonight I want to dedicate this next piece to her, and to every person who creates beauty quietly, without seeking applause." Then he began to play. The melody that followed wasn't one from a famous composer. It was something new, something he had written himself. It was inspired by that night in the community hall, by Elena's peaceful expression, by the moment their hands had moved together on the keys as if sharing one heartbeat. The piece flowed with emotion, rising, falling, whispering. It carried humility and love, gratitude and grace. When it ended, the audience stood in silence before erupting into applause. But Leonard didn't bow immediately. He simply looked up, his eyes wet, and whispered, "Thank you." That night, a recording of his performance spread online. People around the world began asking about the mysterious woman who inspired the maestro. Some tried to find her name, but Leonard never revealed it. He wanted to protect her peace, to let her stay who she was, unbothered by fame. Meanwhile, Elena continued her quiet life. She still taught children at the small center, still repaired old instruments, still played for those who needed comfort. Sometimes she would hear that Leonard had performed her melody again, and she would smile faintly, proud of how he had found himself again. But she never imagined what would happen next. One day, she received a letter from the same foundation that had hosted their first concert. It invited her to a special event, a Night for Hope, a charity performance to raise funds for young musicians who couldn't afford lessons. Leonard had agreed to perform, but under one condition, that she would be there too. When she read it, she hesitated. She had always avoided large crowds and flashing lights, but something about the invitation felt different. It wasn't about fame, it was about purpose. And she knew Leonard wouldn't have asked unless it truly mattered, so she agreed. Weeks later, she found herself standing backstage at a grand concert hall, the same kind of place she had once left behind. The lights were bright, the air buzzing with quiet excitement. People filled every seat, from children in the front row to elderly guests at the back. Leonard met her before the show, smiling warmly. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure either," she admitted softly. "But I remembered what you said, about playing for truth, not applause." He nodded. "That's why we're here tonight." When they walked onto the stage together, the crowd burst into applause. Some recognized Leonard. Others had heard rumors of the mysterious woman he admired. But when Elena stepped to the piano and bowed humbly, the room quieted, sensing something special. Leonard spoke first. "Tonight," he said gently, "we're not here to impress. We're here to give. Every note you hear will help a child learn music. Every sound will build hope where it's needed most. So let's listen, not just with our ears but with our hearts." They began to play. The first piece was Leonard's new composition, the one he had written for her. This time they played it together. Their hands moved in unison, the sound flowing like wind and water blending together. Every note shimmered with emotion, carrying years of struggle, rediscovery, and grace. People in the audience sat mesmerized. Some cried quietly, others held hands. Even the children, usually restless, sat perfectly still. The connection in the room was almost tangible, a reminder of how pure music can unite people without a single word. As the final note lingered in the air, Elena looked at Leonard. He smiled softly, his eyes glistening with tears. The crowd rose to their feet, applauding not out of admiration but out of deep respect. After the concert ended, a few reporters approached, hoping to learn more about the mystery pianist, but Elena politely declined interviews. She thanked them for coming, then turned her attention to the children waiting near the stage. Some were shyly holding small notebooks, asking for her to write a message. She bent down and smiled. "Don't ever stop playing," she told them. "Even when no one listens, play. The music will always hear you." Later that night, after everyone had gone, Leonard found her sitting quietly on the edge of the stage, running her fingers over the piano keys. "You were incredible," he said softly. She smiled. "You were the same." He shook his head. "No, you brought out something in me I didn't know I still had. You reminded me that music doesn't belong to the world, it belongs to the soul." They sat there in silence for a while, the hall empty around them. Then she said gently, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't met that day?" He smiled faintly. "I think I would still be playing for the wrong reasons." "You changed that." She looked at him thoughtfully. "No, Leonard, you changed yourself. I just helped you listen again." He chuckled softly. "You always say that, because it's true." Outside, the city lights shimmered like scattered stars. The night air carried the faint hum of distant traffic. But inside that hall there was peace, the kind that comes only when two people understand something far bigger than themselves. Before they left, Leonard turned to her once more. "I want you to know," he said quietly, "the next piece I compose will be in your name, not as a tribute but as a thank you, for reminding me what music really means." She shook her head, smiling. "You don't need to thank me. Just keep playing with your heart. That's enough." They walked out together, the echoes of their music following them like a gentle breeze. In the months that followed, Leonard's new composition, titled "The Quiet Key," was released. It wasn't loud or grand. It was tender and hauntingly beautiful. It became one of his most beloved works, touching millions around the world. Audiences said it felt like a prayer without words. But Leonard knew who it truly belonged to. He sent a small recording to Elena, along with a note. "You once said music doesn't belong to applause and it belongs to the heart. This one belongs to yours." She listened to it late at night, sitting by the same old piano she had always played. The melody filled the room, soft and glowing, wrapping around her like light. As it ended, she closed her eyes and smiled. Not because it was dedicated to her, but because she could feel his soul in every note. And in that moment, she knew. She had done what she was meant to do. She had reminded someone of truth. Years later, their story became something people spoke about with warmth, not as gossip, but as inspiration. Young musicians learned about the pianist who rediscovered his heart, and the humble woman who led him back to it. Some called it destiny, others called it grace. But to those who truly understood music, it was simply what happens when pride gives way to purity, and when sound becomes soul. And somewhere in a small town by the river, Elena still played, not for fame, not for recognition, but for the quiet joy of knowing that her music, once doubted and mocked, had changed the heart of a man who thought he knew it all. She often said to her students, "The world will always have noise, but real music is what happens when your heart learns to listen." And far away on grand stages across the world, Leonard carried that same lesson. letting every note he played be a thank you to the woman who reminded him that greatness is nothing without grace. The world called him a genius again. But he knew better now. He wasn't playing to prove anything. He was playing to give something back, because in the end, the truest sound of music wasn't the applause that followed. It was the silence that came before the first note. When a heart finally remembered why it was beating,